Once upon a time, there was a boy named Michael whose parents told him that he could be whatever he wanted to be if he worked hard enough. Every day he did work hard in school, on the family farm, and on the baseball field to get a scholarship so he could afford college. One day he got that scholarship and attended his dream school. He was inspired by professors, caring mentors, and committed friends who challenged him to ask big questions and serve the community. Because of that, he fell in love with philosophy and discovered a desire to glean and share wisdom to make the world better. Because of that, he studied more philosophy, theology, and politics to understand the virtues of character needed to live a good life. Until finally he landed at Wake Forest University, where he founded the Program for Leadership and Character and began working to catalyze a movement to educate character in higher education. And ever since that day, he has kept asking big questions, trying to discern how to live and lead with character, and empowering others to seek meaning and purpose in their lives.
Thank you.
Perfect.
I love the journey from the family farm to philosophy to character.
Yes. Some of the best philosophers in ancient Rome were also farmers. And I think for me, that kind of wisdom has been cultivated quite literally by working the ground and also recognizing the hard work required to be a good farmer and a good philosopher.
Welcome to A Life Worth Working. I'm Michelle Weiss, a writer on the future of learning and work.
And I'm Dana Allen Walsh, a pastor and executive coach who helps people connect to meaning and purpose.
Each week, we talk with guests who open up about the messiness, transformation, and wonder of their work lives.
Because we believe the real story of work is always about what we call the soul of work.
Today, we chat with Dr. Michael Lamb from Wake Forest University. He's got way too many titles. He's the F.M. Kirby Foundation Chair of Leadership and Character, Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Humanities, and Executive Director of the Program for Leadership and Character.
Michael walks with us through his journey from a family farm to philosophy and then to character and virtue ethics. He grew up on a small 5-acre farm in Tennessee, tending to tobacco crops as a child.
When I was 6 years old, I had my first work on the farm. We had a sheet on the refrigerator that kept my hours tallied up so I could keep up with the hours I had on the farm. But again, I think I had my own crop at 13, actually. It was the first time I had my own crop. I had about half an acre there by my house, and I shared it with my dad. So I gave him labor for his crops, and he gave me labor and fertilizer and seeds for mine. And that taught me a lot about responsibility early on. It also taught me about how we might find common projects. You know, in a family farm, you do a lot of work together. That's not always paid. That's not always equal. That really goes to support the wider family. So we often swap labor with my cousins and uncles. We help on their crops. They help on our crops. And by doing that together, we actually kind of got the harvest in the fall. And so I think for me, that sort of sharing of labor, taking responsibility for our own effort, knowing that it might not actually work out. You know, farming is very unpredictable. If the weather doesn't cooperate, you might have done everything exactly right, but the harvest doesn't actually yield. And so for me, is that sort of deep, hard work. That was really crucial to my own development. In fact, when I was going to college, I wrote my college essay called A Field of Dreams about how my work on the farm actually shaped my sense of responsibility and hard work in the classroom. And so I think that work ethic that my dad really modeled in his work was very impactful for me growing up.
You write a lot about sort of exemplars and the role of exemplars in fostering character or lives of character. And it just sounds like your parents were those incredible exemplars to you growing up. Do you remember when you were growing up at a certain point in your childhood where you realized that they were providing this incredible example for you? Or was it just sort of like more in retrospect?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I think for me, I was very clear they actually were exemplars, in part because their virtues really stood out so clearly to me. I don't think until I was in college could I name explicitly what it was in the same way. But I think it formed me very deeply. And I think my own sense of what it means to work hard was very much shaped by my parents. They really saw work as a deep value of ours, but also work that wasn't just about your own material gain, but work about really serving your larger community. And so I think that was a very deep value they really modeled in ways more than they actually talked about. They just really modeled that kind of way of being. they really were examples of what it means to be a citizen. My dad worked at a job at a factory 40 hours a week, would come home after his 45-minute commute, change his boots, go back out again to the farm to do more work on the farm at nights and the weekends. But he still made time to be president of our local Lions Club, to serve on our school board, to coach our Little League teams in ways that really showed his own commitment to being part of the community. My mom worked at the local school, and she was the one in the town who often took up, gifts for people at Christmas or food for needy families. Often, anybody ever knowing it, she was one behind the scenes doing the work to really serve others in the community and who often had significant need. And I remember her, my senior year of college, she gave me a mother's first letter to her son for my baby book. And it had her first letter to me in ballpoint pen she'd written in the hospital that day. And it said, "Dear Michael, I hope you become a kind and compassionate person, one who helps those who are less fortunate than yourself." And so that was her very first sentence to me as a child. And so I think her vision for my life of being of service was very important to me. I didn't realize it then how much that would actually shape my own sense of who I am as a person. But I think that deep sense of hard work for my dad and sacrifice for the good of the family or good of the community, and my mom's real sort of commitment to service and compassion, I think really informed me in that way. And so I think because of that, my work here in the academy is not just about advancing ideas. I love ideas. I love ideas. But I want to make ideas that matter to people like my parents, who also are embodying their own ideas of what it means to lead with character. And so how to learn from them.
Michael, I would love to hear about the work you currently do.
So I'm at Wake Forest, and I teach courses on character and leadership here. I also direct a program for leadership and character here that's really trying to help students at Wake Forest grow in their own virtues of character to be the kind of leaders and citizens that our world needs. And so that involves organizing programs, training faculty, organizing conferences, mentoring one-on-one, where often the most important transformation happens in those one-on-one settings, as it did for me when I was in college. We're also in our program helping to catalyze a wider movement around character in higher education. We've received grants from various foundations to really help create a network, a community of other colleges and universities doing work on character. So now through this work, we've now been able to give out grants to about 146 institutions in the last 2 years to really help them develop their own programs around character. And we're creating a whole network now that includes over 1,600 faculty and staff from institutions across the country who are really committed to doing work to help students gain wisdom and humility and courage and compassion in their own education. And so that for me feels very aligned with who I want to be as a teacher, but also as a citizen. And so I feel very called in that sense to really show up, to take this work and not just keep it confined to academic journals or to books or even to my own campus, but really to sort of use it to sort of be a leaven for others across the country. And that's been a very meaningful part of this work at Wake Forest.
You mentioned the word call, and we frequently asked our guests to explore that sense of call or vocation, and whether you feel like your sense of call has been something that's been with you always, or has that been something formed in response to the experiences you've had in life?
Definitely response. And one is I love that word, as I love the word vocation, is it comes from the Latin meaning voice. And what voice do you hear from outside of yourself that calls you to a certain way of being or doing in the world? And so for me, for so long, I thought I'd go into politics and public service as my calling. And I was very committed to that. In high school, I worked on campaigns. I was very involved in politics. In college, I studied politics as my major. I worked for a U.S. congressman one semester. I then helped on 2 different campaigns when I was in college for a state senator who became a mentor to me. And so I thought for a long time that politics would be my kind of calling. And I was really admired exemplars from the past who really embodied good character in politics. And I studied whether or not you can make compromises and have your integrity. One summer, I wrote a senior thesis in my political science major on the ethics of ambition. Is it ethical to be ambitious or not? I was really grappling myself with these big ethical questions about what is my calling, and is that me calling myself, or is that something outside of me calling me to this work? And so I was actually in graduate school when I was in my mid-20s, and got a call literally from my mentor back at home in Tennessee, who said, Michael, I'm running for governor. Would you come back and be my chief of staff? And so I ended up taking a leave from grad school at Princeton when I was doing my PhD to go back for a year and a half and serve as his chief of staff for campaign for governor in Tennessee. And then we switched to U.S. Congress halfway through. And that was a very meaningful experience for me to really have a chance to see what politics is like on the ground, to work for somebody I really believed in. And I trusted to have the integrity that I really admired, but also to learn the ups and downs of politics and to see the ways that, campaigns unfold, the ways that campaigning is so crucial to winning a race, and how governing often gets sort of subordinate to the experience of campaigning, and how much campaigning itself is about fundraising. Mm-hmm. So our candidate was not a wealthy candidate, and so we had to raise money. And so, most of my job was actually trying to find ways to raise money to support the campaign. And so it wasn't the sort of idealistic vision of governing and writing policy that I might have thought it was. It was much more tactical and also quite intense. And I remember, my candidate was this amazing man named Roy Heron, who was a real role model for me, someone who really cared about justice and compassion, who lived that. He also was this amazing speaker and legislator, and he'd done, Ironman triathlons. He just was very active and vigorous in his life and full of energy in life. And he also was a Methodist minister for a long time. So, we would start every morning with a 5:30 a.m. run, and then do our staff meetings on the run with a dictation unit, talking about speeches or working with staff. And so, but, from 5:30 in the morning until 9 at night, it was a kind of full out sprint. And so I think the exhaustion of that, the ways that was really not as life-giving as I thought it would be, really sort of helped me see that politics might not be my calling after all. And I think it was a sense that my community wanted me to go into politics, and I felt really inspired by them and my own interest in it. But I realized later on that it was maybe not the actual true calling I had. My calling really was to glean wisdom from the world and share it with others who were seeking it. And so I was back at grad school in the library after that campaign when I was 27, 28. And I was reading this kind of book about Socrates and came across this great quote in Xenophon's Memorabilia, where Socrates is engaging this sophist interlocutor, Antiphon, who he's criticized about being in politics, not being quite as just as Socrates thinks he ought to be. And so Antiphon says, "Listen, Socrates, buddy, it's pretty hard being in politics. You should do it yourself. You should walk the walk, Socrates." And he says in response, "How now, Antiphon? Is it better to be one private person in politics, or to take pains to turn out or teach as many competent politicians as possible?" And so I saw then that teaching could be a way actually I could fulfill my vocation as a leader in politics without having to be the one running for office, that I could actually teach citizens and leaders to be the kind of people who could actually do justice and love kindness and really show humility in the world in ways that would actually be part of my own calling. And so that felt like at that point, this is what I should be doing. I should be really a teacher who doesn't stand apart from the world, but engages in the world to try to serve the world in that way. There was kind of a gradual sort of reckoning and realization that teaching could be a meaningful form of vocation, even if it wasn't quite as well recognized or as prominent as being in politics or being on stage or on the camera, talking about these big issues. But it could actually help shape souls. And I think I was for a long time yearning for that sort of deep connection to other people's sort of soul journeys, given my own soul journey and what really had formed me. And so I think it was that grappling with the challenge between depth and breadth of impact. How do you sort of balance for having impact on many different people versus having impact deeply on a lot fewer? And so I still grapple with that now in my current work. How do I sort of balance the desire to have an impact on many different universities or students or people, but also to make sure that it's really going deep? And I'm actually able to be present to people's unfolding journeys in ways that help them, that guide them, that give them the encouragement, the permission, the support they need to really be who they want to be. And I had great professors in college who did that for me and in graduate school. And so I've seen how much that matters to people's life as it did to mine. And so I think I want to be able to combine both of those things together. But that's a constant struggle for me to know how to balance that tension between writing books that might reach a wide audience, but also being one-on-one with a student in my office who's really grappling with a deep ethical or personal question and really trying to be present to them in ways that really allow them to be who they are. And I think it's that constant tension I feel between doing that every day that makes it work really exciting for me, but also at times pretty hard to discern what's the best.
So, Michael, I love this sense of call and this deepening into the depth and breadth of the work that has meaning and impact. And I'm curious, you've touched on this a little bit, for you to share how your understanding of success has evolved over your time and over your career.
Yeah, I think, growing up where I did, I think success was about achievement of a certain kind, to be the top in your school, in your class, to get the highest grades, to get into college, to win awards for whatever it is that you're winning awards for. And I ended up finding recently, my senior year of high school English notebook, where I had my essays I'd found in my cursive handwriting on loose leaf paper that I'd written, about one was about my 5-year goals, and one was about what does it mean to be a good citizen, and I even saw the words character throughout that essay in ways I'd really was struck to see. Even hearing about the importance of a good example, that was part of my own, senior year of high school imagination. But also saw in me someone who was really hungry and hungry for achievement in ways I think is even more prominent now in our culture, where achievement becomes a standard of success, and achievement marked by these external standards. It's grades, or it's awards, or it's prestige in some way. And I think for me, that was part of my way out. In some ways, my way to kind of get a scholarship, to go to college, to get to able to have this opportunity I wouldn't have otherwise. And so that was very important for me. And so I look back now and recognize that was sort of one part of my journey. But when I got to college, I began to realize a much broader sense of what success might look like. It wasn't just about achieving things. It was about ways in which you integrate that for the good of the world, or the service of people in your community. And so I think my achievement shifted a little bit, but I still was probably habituated to achieve in that way, because you still go to grad school, and I need to afford grad school. And so I was trying to find ways to make the next step. And I think it was really, in my mid-20s when I began to see that these habits had really served me well growing up, and helped me achieve many things that made opportunities possible that would have been possible otherwise, but that they might not serve me in the same ways going forward. And so I think one of my points of growth and reckoning these last few years, even in my current role, was how do I reckon with this habit of working hard to achieve things actually, and making sure that's rooted in real sense of purpose. That's not just about personal advancement or gain, but actually really serving a larger calling. And also grappling with real burnout when that happened. And those habits really led to a place where I couldn't sort of pull back in ways that I needed to pull back. And so it was that reckoning with these sort of habits, and how those habits have both made me who I am in beautiful ways, and also constrained me in ways that I might want to sort of let go of, or at least reimagine as I lead in the next part of my life. And so I think success has become much more focused on wider purposes than just my own. And I think it's also become much more about excellences that often aren't recognized in our culture, including excellences of character. The Greek word for virtue, arete, also means excellence. I think we often forget that character is one form of excellence we can aspire to. And that when we think about people in our own lives, we look at it and admire. It's not those who achieve great awards usually. It's those who actually were kind to us and really demonstrated courage in a time of deep moral conflict or ambiguity, who made sacrifices for the good of others. That kind of compassion, humanity, hope is what we'll think about when we actually, imagine our own eulogy. And so I often think about my own eulogy as one kind of touch point for me. What will people say at my own funeral? It probably won't mention that grade I made in high school English, or, or that award I won here, or this project that I worked on, even the book I write. They might say that he, I hope they say that he was a kind person, that he embodied compassion, that he made time for me when I was struggling. He helped me in some way. And those are often things that don't appear on the CV anywhere. And I think the academy and our culture is so focused on external markers of prestige and success that those internal markers that are often invisible often aren't given the credit that they deserve in our culture. And so one of my hopes now is I'm trying to sort of really inhabit that space, is to make sure I don't forget the importance of those excellences of character that really shape who we are in the world. And that's what I hope our students will gain in this program, but also that we can sort of shift the culture to make sure those kind of character traits and virtues are really what success actually means.
Michael, we're going to kind of switch directions a tiny bit right now, and just we often have a separate little episode that we air that we call the shit pile episode, which is just about the shittiest moment in your personal life or your career where you felt maybe stuck, you felt isolated in some way. But we often have people sort of focus on this moment we call them kind of compost moments because they're literal shit in our lives, just hard times that lead to significant growth, that growth maybe that we couldn't have achieved otherwise. As you kind of look back on your life and because you've had just various experiences around the world even, and I'm just curious, like, can you think of one where it felt like one of those compost moments?
Can I name two, Michelle? Is that okay?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, one inspired by the title of your episode is working on the farm where often you are shoveling manure deeply and doing this work that's not very glamorous. It's often that's very exhausting and hard, and you're not getting paid for it, and you're doing it because the family needs it. And you wonder, your friends are out on Saturday night, riding around the town in their new car, or they're sleeping late on Saturday mornings, or they're going fishing. And I'm out there in the fields or in the barn working. And there are times that I think that I felt both a deep commitment to that work, but also some resentment about that. That I didn't have the kind of free and playful childhood that I might otherwise have had. And I think, and when I think about those times, that I realized that was really forming me in deep patterns of work, but also of commitment to my family, to causes that are bigger than myself. That really shaped me profoundly. And I think much of my own harvest in my life has been harvesting from those habits learned so early from that work on the farm. And so that doesn't mean it's always glamorous or always easy, but I do think it taught me a lot about what it means to be part of a common project and to really to work hard. I mean, I learned how to work hard early on, and that's served me really well, even as it also has created these habits that also can be dangerous sometimes. And my second moment that really was a time of deep growth for me was a period of burnout where I'd worked so much that I needed to actually reset. And so I was turning 40 that year. I built this program at Wake Forest from scratch and with a lot of effort and energy. I was going up for tenure that year. I'd just gotten tenure. So trying to do all the things that you do to get tenure, write books, write articles, teach classes, while also building this program outside of that. My book was actually due to publisher that year. So we had these big milestones: getting tenure, publishing my book, turning 40, getting a major grant, the biggest grant we'd ever gotten at my university at the time, to do this program, while also feeling totally exhausted and emotionally numb. And the things I loved doing became just things I had to do, and they became burdens, not sources of joy for me. And so it was really this real deep exhaustion. And it affected my relationships. It affected my own personal happiness. It affected my work. And so I think it was that year I had a sabbatical, luckily, and I did the Camino de Santiago in Spain for about 18 days by myself on this journey of pilgrimage. I began reading and writing poetry more and doing some hard work around, who am I? What are my habits? What habits have served me well? Which habits now that have served me well might need to be rethought or abandoned in ways to develop new habits? And so I think that was a deep time of both great success and also real difficulty in my life. And so it helped me really in that period of coming out of that burnout, begin to set more boundaries in my life, begin to figure out what really matters most to me, and how to create some habits that bring me joy, that can actually add some sort of levity and light to the work that might seem really dark and deep at times. So I began writing poetry. I've been writing haiku the last few years, and began publishing haiku the last few months. And so finding creative outlets for my thought, but also trying to find ways to be more attentive. When I write haiku, I actually have to tend to things beyond myself. I have to look at the world and attend to very concrete details and try to condense them into very short verses. So I think that sort of attention has been very important for me at coming out of this period of burnout.
Didn't you aren't you writing a book on baseball and haiku or something like that?
I am. I'm trying to right now. I've gotten about 50 or 60 baseball haiku, Michelle, that I've written, and I'm trying to make them good enough to be worthy of publication. But it has been a fun project. I've been doing a lot of work on haiku. That it's been a great way for me to think about capturing memories of my childhood and trying to find ways, if you only have 12 or 14 syllables to do that, that's quite a challenge. And how do you condense it? How do you bring emotional weight to it? Sure. And how, for me, as someone who's really lives in my mind a lot, as a philosopher who's doing work in the academy, how do I also shift into my heart, in my senses, in ways that bring me closer to the ground, closer to my own center of being, and allow my heart to speak in some ways. And so I think poetry's been that way for me. I didn't love poetry. I grew up not really liking poetry at all in high school. It felt so esoteric and so clever, and I wasn't clever enough to understand it. And then I found some great poets in my life, thanks to some friends who really helped me see poetry as a way to build bridges. And so I see in my own life a way to build bridges through poetry that connects ordinary experience with my own work as a professor. And that's been really meaningful for me.
Oh, I love that. I also love that part of your process of recovering from burnout is walking the Camino, that embodiment of, like you said, moving into your senses and being present to the world around you, and step by step, being able to have that space. I've always wanted to walk the Camino, Michael. So
it was amazing. I recommend it highly. I think for me, it was a chance really to be with myself and also be embodied. And when you're walking every day, I was walking about 17 miles a day, and at one point your body starts wearing out. And then you can't control the emotions anymore. And so your emotions start coming up in ways you don't actually anticipate. And so it became a very emotionally raw and rich experience for me as I began to sort of reckon with my own habits and also think about who I wanted to be going forward. And also this great moments of transcendence on the Camino with other pilgrims or other sources of beauty there. And just seeing these people who are so earnest in their seeking for what is good and right and being alongside them in solidarity. Even though your journey may be very different from theirs, there's something really special about that. And it takes away all the kind of the ornamentation of life, and it really gets it down to its real core. And for me, that kind of experience of just being reduced to a backpack and shoes and, a few, good Spanish meals, that was really crucial. And I made amazing friendships there, and it helped me kind of recenter myself. When I went in the first night there at the albergue, the hostel that we stayed in, the host, who was this beautifully generous spirit, asked us all to give a title to our Camino as if it was a book. What would your book be called? And mine was An Invitation to My Soul, because I think my soul had been so ignored by my pursuit of these goods at work. My mind had been so dominant. My desire to sort of create these things had been so strong that my soul had not much chance to speak. And so for me to have an invitation to it, to invite it to come out and to speak, was very important for my own journey. And I recommend anyone having spaces with us on the Camino or in their own town to find ways that your soul can speak. And I think that's been very important for me the last few years.
Yeah. And I love what you say about that shared moments of transcendence. For me, transcendence is such a powerful antidote to burnout and to kind of the ways that our senses get dulled to the beauty and awe around us. Michael, I'm curious about if you've found a connection between creativity and burnout, or like creativity as a balm for the burnout, that you started writing haiku. And I'm just curious if you've thought about that at all.
Absolutely. For me, I am a writer. At least I try to be a writer, not always successfully. I have written a lot, but often academic writing can be tedious, can be laden with footnotes and references, and the need to make sure you're being responsible for every possible argument that could be made in this context. And so it often sometimes stunts the creative juices that I found as a kid when I was a writer. And so I think haikus give me a chance in only 3 lines, or even sometimes 1 line. This does not have to be a 10,000 word article. It doesn't have to be a 100-page book. This is a 3-line poem. You only got 17 syllables here at max to work with. And it's given me some freedom to play with words again and not just have to be so serious about that. So to be able to play with words and to see words and find joy in sort of creating these little images. One haiku writer in one journal calls them bottle rockets, like little bottle rockets, that kind of that go into the world and then kind of flare and then end. And so it's been a great source for me of creativity. And I find when I'm actually in the mornings, when I read or write poetry in the mornings on the weekends, even in the midst of very difficult or busy days, I find my spirit is lighter because of the creativity. And so I realized that I am what I've had to come to terms with. I think that's been a surprise to me, perhaps, because it wasn't always celebrated in my hometown. Was I think I have an artistic streak about me. I really want to be an artist of sorts. My mom was an artist. She was a beautiful painter and taught us to do art growing up. And so I think when I'm doing art or creating art in some way, I found my spirit just a bit more buoyant. Yeah. And that's been a great sort of remedy for burnout and many other things that I find quite difficult.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just finding this amusing too, just because we interviewed Jeffrey Rosen, who also writes sonnets to kind of encapsulate his thinking and put it in, and it helps him sort of process. But it's neat to hear you both talk about the power of poetry in your work and your lives. I also love the fact that you took this moment to realize that what got you here won't get you there, right? Like all these virtues and, the work ethic that you have can also have a negative component to it, right? And that you were able to sort of say, take a moment to yourself and then kind of get back to your soul, right? The heart, which is really beautiful.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things I learned from one of my mentors in college, Nancy Miller Herron, who was on the campaign trail. Her and her husband, Roy, were mentors during the campaign. And they often say that, our greatest sources of strength are also our greatest source of weakness. And that our greatest sources of light are also the ones who cast shadows. And so trying to be attentive to that and not denying the light or the shadows and just honoring them and trying to find ways to show more light. So I think for me, it's recognizing that these strengths also can be weaknesses and can have limitations. And so how to be aware of that and to be always open to hearing ways I can grow and ways I can actually cast fewer shadows with my light. One thing I've thought about a lot and even taught some is this great quote from William Kentridge about being rescued by our failures, a South African artist, and how he was rescued by his failures. And I think at times there are parts of my life where I have failed in some ways or things didn't go as I wanted them to go. And that ended up being a beautiful gift to me. And I think just being attentive to those times when things that might seem like the end of the world or the end of a career or the end of a certain kind of work can actually open up new ways to see parts of yourself or the world you didn't actually anticipate. And so I think just being rescued by your failures and being open to being rescued by your failures is really crucial. And I think a second thing I'll add is just that I think one kind of motto of my college experience that has now become a motto of our program here at Wake Forest is the importance of living the questions, as Rilke, the poet, talks about in Letters to a Young Poet. And it's easy for us to want to seek questions and want to have certainty now, to have the answers now. And it's often living the questions with real integrity and patience that helps answers sort of eventually unfold in ways that actually are true. And I think one thing I've had to really grapple with, whether that be in my own work or in my own character journey, is how do I live the questions, not having certainty about the answer yet, but knowing and trusting that by living them as best I can, faithfully, with integrity and real sort of humility, that I will eventually grow into the answer. And I think I've had experience in my own life where living the questions at times when I felt very anxious about not having the answers has led to real peace about the answers in ways I wouldn't have even imagined. So I think for me, as I tell my students a lot, is that the questions can be quite angst-inducing now, and they can actually create a lot of uncertainty. But if you keep living them faithfully and trusting that living them faithfully is the right way, then actually you'll grow into answers you can't even see yet.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me has been a great motto of our work here.
That's so beautiful.
I know, it's really powerful.
I'm so glad you added that.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you. It's been very important to me.
An invitation to my soul.
That title for his Camino, it says everything, doesn't it? Your soul can't speak when your mind is too loud.
And 17 syllables. That's all you get in a haiku. After all those footnotes and 10,000 word articles, he needed 3 lines to find his way back.
Your greatest source of light also casts shadows. That's the work. The beautiful thing about Michael Lamb is that he's doing the work himself, to not just talk about or teach character, but to try to live it. Parker Palmer writes in The Courage to Teach, "Good teaching cannot be reduced to technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and integrity of the teacher."
Palmer frames teaching as an act of courage because we will even have to expose our own ignorance in order to keep learning, in order to invite students into deeper questions about meaning, purpose, and character. We have to make ourselves vulnerable and to teach in ways that may not always be popular or safe in academic or institutional contexts.
Yeah, Palmer says this so beautifully. He explains, The courage to teach is the courage to keep one's heart open in those very moments when the heart is asked to hold more than it is able, so that the teacher and students and subjects can be woven into the community that learning and living require.
If only more of our young people can be surrounded by this same courage to teach.
Yes, the courage to keep our hearts open.
She's Michelle Weiss.
And she's Dana Allen Walsh.
This has been another episode of A Life Worth Working.
Subscribe and share with friends who may be navigating their own uncertain paths, and keep searching with us for the soul of work.